Warning: contains somewhat mature content, including language, brief violence, and mild sexual themes, and may not be suitable for people under age 14.
He put his arms around her gently, and one hand rested on her collarbone. Cho blushed and looked down, noticing how close to her chest his hand was. She remembered what Kane had said, and moved his hand away from her chest and onto her shoulder. Reitan blinked and pulled away to look at her. "The only places on my body you are allowed to touch," she said, authority in her voice, "are my ribcage, arms, neck, and head. Got it?" Reitan stared at her, then laughed.
"Got it," he said. "I must say, Cho, I am a bit surprised. I thought you hated me."
Cho blushed as Reitan laid her down, and he lay gently on top of her, kissing her jawbone. Cho stammered, completely flustered. Hate is only that of which you make of it." Reitan laughed again.
"Whatever, weirdo."
His hand gently stroked her hair as he moved his lips to hers, kissing ever so gently. Cho closed her eyes, her heart pounding hard. For a few minutes she enjoyed the attention, but suddenly she began to see horrible images on the inside of her eyelids, and she screamed and pushed Reitan away, sitting up quickly. Reitan backed away, his brow furrowed.
"Cho, what the—"
he began to say, but then his eyes widened as he stared at her. Cho's hair was blowing gently, as if there was wind in the room. The flame of the candles flickered wildly, and Reitan looked to the window. It was closed, so there was no way that there could be wind in the room. Suddenly the candles blew out, and Reitan looked back to Cho and gasped. Her black hair and dress had turned white in the darkness, and her skin a charcoal gray. She stared at him with menacing eyes that had turned completely black, except her irises had turned as white as her hair.
Cho?
Reitan said, voice shaking.
"Are you all right?"
Cho hissed and came closer to him. "You are using me," she said shrilly, her voice echoing eerily around the room. Reitan's eyes widened.
"No, Cho, I'm not using you,"
he said, frightened. Cho raised a hand and grabbed his throat, beginning to choke him. "You don't care about me!" she shrieked. Reitan coughed and struggled, then managed to push her away. Cho fell backwards, but then got up and began moving to him again. But before she could reach him, Reitan threw out his arms on either side of him, and little balls of fire shot out of his hands and to each of the candles, igniting them once more. Cho's hair and dress turned back to black, and her eyes and skin back to normal. She swayed and fell sideways into the bed, having fainted. Reitan panted, beads of sweat dripping down his face. He stood up quickly and left the room, locking the door so Cho couldn't get out. Cho woke up a few hours later with a huge headache. She groaned, opening her eyes and noticing Reitan standing in front of the window, looking at her. Cho furrowed her brow. "What happened?" she asked. "I fell asleep?" The last thing she could remember was Reitan kissing her. Surely she couldn't have been so bored from that she fell asleep. Reitan turned to look out the window.
"You were tired," he said. "But while you were sleeping, I went out and managed to find out where that demon I told you about is hiding. We should go there before it's dark, and he has a chance to move locations."
Cho watched the back of his head, frowning. She felt something was different about him. She got up and waited for him to turn around. When he did, he walked over to her and opened a portal, stepping through it. Cho blinked. She had expected him to take her hand or put his arm around her. She felt a bit disappointed. She sighed and followed Reitan through the portal. When they stepped out of the portal, Cho noticed the sky turning slightly gray.
"It's getting dark," said Reitan. "We must hurry."
He began to walk forward towards a dark gray forest. The trees looked like they were made of stone, and they didn't even have leaves. Cho watched him walk, then followed him, wondering why he wasn't acknowledging her. After a while, Reitan stopped. In front of him was a wide stone tree, as big as a redwood tree from the human world. Carved into the trunk there was what looked like a door, but it was barely noticeable at first glance. Reitan dug his fingers into the grooves around the door and pulled it open, walking in and not even waiting for Cho. Cho hurriedly followed before the door slammed shut again. It was dark inside the tree, but Reitan conjured up a small ball of fire that sat in the palm of his hand. There was a staircase that went down underground, and Reitan descended them, Cho following quickly. "Reitan, why aren't you—" she began, but Reitan shushed her. Cho fell silent, frowning. They finally reached the bottom of the stairs. The place had only one room, which was made out of stone, just like the rest of the tree. There were various forms of stone furniture scattered around the room. In the middle of the room there was a stone chair with a huge demon sitting in it, its back to them. It was hunched over something in front of it. Reitan cleared his throat. "Are you Baron?" he asked loudly. The demon jumped and stood up to face them, taking a defensive stance. Baron the demon had to be about 7.5 feet tall. He looked like a giant blue reptilian armadillo. He had huge claws on his hands and feet, and a mohawk of spikes on his head. His eyes were a lighter blue than his scaled skin, but they had the same cat-eye pupil as the rest of the demons Cho had seen.
"Who are you and what are you doing in my house?"
said Baron with a very low, booming voice.
"My name is Reitan," Reitan replied. "I work under the rule of Emperor Dracus."
Baron glared.
"If you expect me to come quietly,"
he said angrily, but Reitan put up a hand.
"I'm not here to try and capture you,"
he said, and Baron blinked, expression softening.
"I'm here to make a deal with you. We are planning to overthrow Dracus, and we need your help."
Baron furrowed his brow.
"What's in it for me?"
he said slowly.
"Well,"
said Reitan,
"depends. What do you want?"
Baron smiled triumphantly, going over to sit on a stone couch. Cho saw that the thing Baron was hunched over before was a stone table with a stone chest set on it.
"The thing I want,"
said Baron,
"is a school."
Reitan blinked.
"We already have schools," he said.
"I want a school that I can teach at.
Baron continued.
A school where I can teach young demons my skills."
Reitan nodded.
"Once Dracus is destroyed, we can make that happen," said Reitan.
"So,"
said Baron, now seeming much more friendly,
"what is it that you want from me?"
Reitan smirked and sat in the chair by the chess table. Cho just stood there, feeling invisible.
"First,"
said Reitan, picking up a pawn and examining it,
"I want you to give that girl right there some of your power. Second, I want you to train her, me, and my army. Third, when it comes to destroying Dracus, we want you to aid us. Can you do that?"
Baron laughed.
"It's something I wanted to do for centuries."
Reitan smirked.
"Fantastic,"
he said, putting the pawn down and examining the chessboard. The pieces were scattered. It seemed as though Baron had been playing all by himself. Reitan moved a few white pieces, then a few black pieces. Then he picked up a white castle and paused, smiling.
"We'll put Dracus in his place. He won't know what hit him."
Reitan placed the castle in a square near the king.
"Checkmate."
Baron stood up, as did Reitan. They walked to each other and shook each other's hand. Baron looked over at Cho.
"What's your name, girl?"
Cho trembled. Cho, she said, bowing gently. Baron walked over to her and put a hand to her forehead. Cho's body began to feel very warm, and she was lifted into the air by some unseen force. Baron took his hand away and watched her. Cho's body glowed red as she hovered, and she felt a pleasant burning sensation through all of her veins. A few seconds later, she was slowly lowered to the floor, and her body stopped glowing.
"Now,"
said Baron.
"concentrate all of your body heat to your hand."
Cho stared up at him, eyebrows furrowed. She closed her eyes and concentrated very hard. She felt a strange wave of heat move down her arm into the palm of her hand, then noticed a bright light shining through her eyelids. She opened her eyes and saw a little ball of fire sitting in her hand. Cho smiled and looked at Baron, and her fire extinguished. "That is so cool!" Cho exclaimed. Baron chuckled and turned to Reitan.
"I won't be able to start the training right away,"
he said.
"I can probably start in a few days at the least."
Reitan nodded.
"Thank you for your help. You know where to contact me."
Reitan turned and began to walk up the stone staircase. Cho followed quickly behind him. When they exited the tree, Reitan opened another portal and stepped through it, once again not waiting for Cho. She followed him back to his room and saw him go back to the window. Cho opened her mouth to speak, but Reitan got there first.
"Go look in the mirror,"
he said coldly. Cho winced at the tone of his voice, but went to the bathroom to look in the mirror. She gasped and saw that her brown eyes had turned into crimson cat eyes, the common physical trait she kept seeing in demons. Cho came back out to see that Reitan was in his chair, writing in his diary. "Reitan, why aren't you talking to me, or caressing me, or anything else you usually do?" Reitan didn't look at her.
I'm busy right now, Cho. Go occupy yourself, he said, voice emotionless.
Cho frowned and sighed, going to lie on the bed. She stared at the window, the gray horizon having gone completely black, and a white moon shining bright in the starless sky. For hours Cho lay there on her side, watching the moon slowly shift to the left as it threatened to go down and make it day again. She wasn't tired in the least, and neither was Reitan, it seemed. For as long as Cho laid there, the sound of flipping pages was heard every so often. She pretended to be asleep. Finally, Reitan stood up, and Cho could hear him walking closer to the bed. She smiled, knowing that he was going to sleep next to her. She had never felt more relieved. To her disappointment, Reitan took his pillow and a blanket that Cho wasn't using, and took them to his chair, where he sat and fell asleep. Cho rolled over on her other side to see him sleeping in the chair. Her lip trembled, and she held back tears. She turned back over to watch the moon go down, not falling asleep for an instant. When the light was shining very bright, Cho decided she might as well get up. She sat up and looked over to the chair where Reitan was stirring. He opened his eyes and groaned, putting a hand to his back. "Not so comfortable to sleep on, is it?" said Cho coldly. Reitan glanced at her for a second, then looked away, not answering. Cho furrowed her brow and stared at him hard, but Reitan ignored her, getting up to change his clothes. Cho sighed and grabbed a random outfit from her clothes and went to change in the bathroom. When she came out, she sighed. She had picked out a pair of very tight and very short shorts. She had also grabbed a tight black leather halter top. Feeling very uncomfortable, she managed a weak smile. "Check me out, Reitan," she said, putting her arms out. "Boy, do I look like a tramp! Sure wish I had some real clothing." Reitan didn't look at her as he pulled on a vinyl shirt that had many buckles on it. Cho frowned. "Aren't you going to turn around and tell me I look beautiful? Or even try to seduce me in some way?" Reitan once again didn't answer. He just sat in his chair and began to read. Cho was very angry now. She had half a mind to just take her clothes off in order to get his attention, but then she realized how stupid that thought was and went to sit on the bed. She grabbed her doll and cuddled it gently. Suddenly, Cho's stomach gave a ferocious growl. She blinked and set her hand on it. "Reitan, can we go eat some breakfast or something?" she asked. Reitan glanced at her, then sighed and stood up. Cho smiled at finally being able to spend time with him. He opened the door. "If you will please get Nestle to make the human girl some breakfast," he told his guards. Cho frowned as she was suddenly pushed out of the room by Reitan, and then the door closed. She felt a tiny tug at her shorts, and looked down to see little Nestle looking up at her.
"Come with me,"
she squeaked.
"I will make you some food."
Nestle scuttled away and Cho followed sadly. Once down in the kitchen, Nestle scuttled over to the fridge and opened it. She was much too short to really reach anything inside. Said Cho. "Would you like some help?" Nestle looked over to her and gave a pained smile.
"No, dearie,"
she said.
"I can handle it."
Nestle's little body glowed a bright green, and Cho watched as she grew at least 2.5 feet taller. Cho gawked as Nestle dug into the fridge, taking out ingredients. "How'd you do that?" asked Cho, astonished. Nestle laughed.
"I'm a shape-shifting demon,"
Nestle replied.
"I can morph my own body and even mimic that of another body. Watch."
She glowed green again and her body transformed into Cho's. Cho was now looking at an exact replica of herself. "That's so cool," she said as Nestle turned back into her taller self.
"Yeah, to you,"
she said, beginning to cook.
"but they rejected me at the training academy. The only thing I can do is shapeshift, and I guess they don't consider it a very powerful ability."
Cho frowned. "Well, I think it could be useful," she said. Nestle smiled and continued cooking. After a few minutes, she put a bowl of ramen in front of Cho and then shrank back to her normal size. Cho began eating, but soon she lost her appetite because she couldn't stop thinking about Reitan. She pushed the bowl away. "I'm kind of full," she said. Nestle nodded.
"Just go back to the room. I'll take care of it,"
she replied. Cho sighed and hopped off the chair, going upstairs. She trudged her way to the guards of the room and they let her in. Cho blinked, seeing that Reitan was not alone. Baron was sitting on the floor talking with Reitan. When Cho entered, they both looked over to her. Baron stood up.
And there she is, my new favorite pupil,
he said. Cho blinked again as the huge demon came closer to her.
We start your training today. Are you excited?
Cho looked to Reitan, who wasn't looking at them. She furrowed her brow and looked back to Baron. Yes, tremendously excited, she said angrily. She was furious. She didn't know why Reitan wasn't speaking to her, or even acknowledging her. All she knew was that, if he was going to be that way, she'll play that game as well.